In the dusty plains of 1880s Kansas, where judgment fell as harsh as the prairie sun, some souls carried burdens heavier than any saddlebag. What happens when a woman, fleeing her past, encounters the one person who sees her not for what she's done, but for who she could become? This is a story that will challenge everything you think you know about second chances, family, and the innocent wisdom of a child's heart. If stories of redemption and unexpected hope touch your soul, hit that subscribe button and join our community of storytellers. You won't want to miss what unfolds next. The autumn wind cut through the Kansas prairie like a blade, carrying with it the scent of dying grass and distant wood smoke. Margaret O'Sullivan pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders as she stumbled through the tall grass, her boots catching on hidden roots and stones. Behind her, the lights of Dodge City grew smaller with each desperate step. At 26, Margaret had lived more lifetimes than most women twice her age. Her auburn hair, once her pride, now hung in tangled strands beneath a faded bonnet. Her green eyes, which had once sparkled with dreams, now held the hollow look of someone who had seen too much and hoped too little. The saloon dress she wore, deep burgundy with tattered lace, marked her as clearly as a brand. In a town like Dodge City, everyone knew what a woman in such attire represented. She was one of the soiled doves, the ladies of the night who worked the establishments along the railroad tracks. But tonight was different. Tonight she was running. The confrontation at the Silver Dollar Saloon still echoed in her mind. Mrs. Abernathy, the preacher's wife, had cornered her outside the general store that afternoon. "How dare you show your face in decent society?" the woman had hissed. "We have children in this town, families trying to live godly lives. Your very presence is a corruption." Margaret had tried to explain that she was only buying supplies, but the crowd that gathered grew hostile. Voices rose in agreement, fingers pointed in accusation, and soon half the town seemed to be staring at her with disgust. "Get out!" someone had shouted. "We don't want your kind here." So she ran. Now, hours later, she found herself miles from town, lost in the vast prairie. The sun had set, and the temperature was dropping rapidly. She had no food, no water, and nowhere to go. In the distance, she spotted the dark silhouette of a barn rising from the grassland. It belonged to some ranch. She could see the faint outline of a house perhaps a quarter-mile away, warm yellow light glowing in its windows. The barn would have to do. At least it would provide shelter from the wind and cold. Margaret approached cautiously, her heart pounding. The barn door stood slightly ajar, and she slipped inside like a ghost. The interior was warm and filled with the comforting smells of hay, leather, and animals. Moonlight filtered through gaps in the wooden walls, casting silver stripes across the floor. In the far corner, she found a pile of clean straw that would serve as a bed. Margaret sank down onto it, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of her exhaustion. Her body ached from walking, her feet were blistered, and her stomach cramped with hunger. But it was the emotional pain that hurt the most. The look of disgust in Mrs. Abernathy's eyes, the way the crowd had turned on her, the feeling of being utterly alone. It all crashed over her like a wave. For the first time in years, Margaret O'Sullivan wept. She cried for the girl she had been before life had beaten her down, for the dreams she had abandoned, for the family she had lost. She cried for the choices that had led her to this moment, hiding in a stranger's barn like a wounded animal. As her tears finally subsided, Margaret pulled her shawl around her like a cocoon and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions to make. But for now, in this quiet sanctuary, she would rest and try to forget the world that had rejected her so completely. Outside, the wind continued to blow across the prairie, carrying with it the promise of change that neither Margaret nor anyone else could yet imagine. The morning sun streamed through the barn's weathered boards, creating a lattice of golden light that danced across Margaret's face. She stirred slowly, her body stiff from sleeping on the straw, and for a moment couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous day came flooding back. She sat up carefully, brushing straw from her hair and dress. Her stomach growled loudly, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. The water barrel in the corner provided relief for her thirst. But food would be another matter entirely. Margaret was considering her options when she heard it, the sound of small feet running across the yard outside, accompanied by a child's laughter. She froze, her heart racing. If she was discovered now, there was no telling what might happen. The barn door creaked open wider, and a shaft of bright sunlight illuminated the interior. Margaret pressed herself deeper into the shadows behind the hay bales, holding her breath. "Here, Patches. Come on, boy." The voice belonged to a child, a boy by the sound of it, probably no more than 6 or 7 years old. Margaret heard the scrabbling of paws on wood as what must have been a dog bounded into the barn. A small, brown and white terrier came bounding around the hay bales, its tail wagging furiously. When it spotted Margaret, it began barking excitedly, dancing around her hiding spot. "What is it, Patches? What did you find?" The boy's footsteps approached, and Margaret knew there was no escape. She closed her eyes and waited for the inevitable screams. The running feet, the angry voices of adults. Instead, she heard a soft gasp. Margaret opened her eyes to find herself looking at a small boy with sandy brown hair and the biggest, most curious blue eyes she had ever seen. He wore simple clothes, and his face was dusted with freckles. In his small hands, he clutched a wooden toy horse, painted in bright colors. For a long moment they simply stared at each other. Margaret waited for the fear, the disgust, the judgment she had grown so accustomed to seeing. But this child's expression held none of those things. Instead, she saw only wonder and something that looked remarkably like recognition. "Are you hiding too?" the boy asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. The question was so unexpected that Margaret found herself speechless. She had prepared for accusations, for demands to know what she was doing there. But this simple, innocent question disarmed her completely. Yes, she managed to say, her voice hoarse. The boy nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense. "I hide sometimes too. When Papa gets angry about the broken fence, or when Mrs. Henderson comes to visit and talks too loud." Despite everything, Margaret felt a small smile tug at the corners of her mouth. "Mrs. Henderson sounds frightening." "She is," the boy said seriously. "She has a mustache bigger than Papa's." This time, Margaret couldn't suppress a small laugh. The sound seemed to delight the boy, whose face broke into a grin. "I'm Tommy," he announced, taking a step closer. "Tommy Whitmore. This is my papa's ranch." Margaret's heart sank. She was trespassing on this child's family property. "I'm Margaret," she said quietly. "I'm sorry for being in your barn, Tommy. I'll leave right away." But Tommy shook his head vigorously. "You don't have to leave." "Are you hungry?" "You look hungry." The mention of his mother sent a chill through Margaret. "Where is your mama, Tommy?" The boy's bright expression dimmed slightly. "Mama went to heaven last winter. Papa says she's watching over us from up there, but I can't see her." Margaret's heart clenched with unexpected sympathy. "I'm sorry about your mama." Tommy nodded, then brightened again with the resilience that only children possess. "But Papa takes good care of me." He held up his wooden horse. "This was Mama's when she was little. Papa gave it to me. Do you want to see my other toys?" The invitation was so innocent, so trusting, that Margaret felt tears prick at her eyes again. When was the last time someone had wanted to share something precious with her? "I would like that very much," she heard herself saying. Tommy's face lit up like the 4th of July. "They're in the house." "Come on." As Margaret followed this remarkable child out of the barn and into the bright morning sunlight, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't even imagine. The Whitmore house was modest but well-maintained, with a wraparound porch and flower boxes that showed the loving touch of a woman, even though that woman was no longer there to tend them. Tommy led Margaret up the front steps with confidence. "Papa built this house for Mama," Tommy explained as he pushed open the front door. "He said she deserved something beautiful, just like her." The interior was simple but comfortable, with handmade furniture and quilts that spoke of a family that had known love and happiness. Photographs lined the mantelpiece, a wedding picture, family portraits, and pictures of Tommy as a baby. Margaret felt like an intruder in this sacred space, but Tommy seemed oblivious to any impropriety. He was already pulling her toward a corner of the main room where a collection of toys was neatly arranged. "This is my train," he announced, picking up a wooden locomotive painted in red and blue. "And these are my soldiers, and this is my top that spins really fast." He demonstrated each toy with enthusiasm, his face glowing with pride. Margaret found herself genuinely enchanted, not just by the toys, but by Tommy's pure joy in sharing them. "They're wonderful," she said, kneeling down to his level. "Did your papa make them?" "Some of them. And some were Mama's from when she was little, like the horse." He picked up the painted horse again. "Papa says Mama would want me to share her toys with people who need them." The words hit Margaret like a physical blow. People who need them. Did this child somehow understand that she was broken, that she needed healing? "Tommy," she began carefully, "what would your papa say if he knew I was here?" The boy considered this seriously. "Papa says we should help people who are sad or scared." "Are you sad or scared?" The simple question pierced through all of Margaret's defenses. "Yes," she whispered. "I am." Tommy nodded as if this settled the matter completely. "Then Papa would want to help you." Before Margaret could respond, Tommy had moved on to another toy, a small wooden doll with a painted face and yarn hair. This was Mama's favorite. She told me stories about all the adventures they had together. He held the doll out to Margaret. "Do you want to hold her?" "Sometimes when I'm sad, holding Mama's things makes me feel better." Margaret accepted the doll with trembling hands. It was worn smooth by countless hours of play. "She's beautiful," Margaret said, her voice thick with emotion. They spent the next hour playing with Tommy's toys, and Margaret found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in years. The child's acceptance was like a balm to her wounded soul. He didn't ask about her past, didn't judge her appearance. To him, she was simply Margaret, someone who needed kindness. As they played, Tommy chatted about his life on the ranch, his papa's work, his memories of his mother. He wanted to be a rancher like his papa, he said, but also maybe a train conductor or possibly a soldier. "What do you want to be?" he asked Margaret as they built a tower with wooden blocks. The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her about her dreams in so long. I don't know," she admitted. Tommy looked at her with those wise blue eyes. "That's okay. Mama used to say that sometimes we have to try lots of different things before we find what makes us happy. Maybe you just haven't found your thing yet." The innocence of his words made Margaret's chest tight with emotion. This child who had lost so much still believed in possibilities. "Tommy," she said softly, "you are a very special boy." He beamed at the compliment, then suddenly jumped up. "Are you hungry? I know where Papa keeps the good cookies." As they shared cookies in the kitchen, sitting at the table like old friends, Margaret felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Peace. For this brief moment, she wasn't a fallen woman or a social outcast. She was simply someone worthy of kindness. But even as she savored the feeling, she knew it couldn't last. Soon, Tommy's father would return, and the harsh realities would come crashing back. Still, as she watched Tommy's animated face, Margaret allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to belong somewhere, to be part of a family. "You know what?" Tommy said suddenly. "You remind me of Mama." Margaret's heart stopped. "What do you mean?" "You have kind eyes like she did, and you listen to my stories without getting bored. And you make me feel safe like Mama used to." Before Margaret could respond, Tommy climbed down from his chair and took her hand. "Come on," he said, with a smile that could have melted the hardest heart. "I want to show you Mama's garden." As Tommy led her toward the back door, his small hand warm and trusting in hers, Margaret felt something crack open inside her chest. For the first time in years, she felt like she might be coming home. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent when the sound of hoofbeats echoed across the prairie. Margaret, who had been helping Tommy tend to his mother's struggling garden, felt her blood turn to ice. "That's Papa!" Tommy exclaimed with delight, jumping up from where he had been showing Margaret how to water the roses. "He's home early." Margaret's mind raced. She should run, should disappear back into the barn or flee across the prairie. But Tommy's small hand was still in hers, and the trust in his eyes held her frozen. "Tommy," she began urgently, "I should go—" "No!" The boy's grip tightened. "I want Papa to meet you. I want to tell him how you helped with Mama's flowers." Before Margaret could protest, a tall figure rounded the corner of the house. James Whitmore was exactly what she had expected. A man in his early 30s, with sandy brown hair, weathered hands, and the kind of steady presence that came from years of hard work. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. They were the same brilliant blue as Tommy's, kind eyes that widened in shock at the sight of her. "Papa!" Tommy called out, running toward his father. "This is Margaret. She's been helping me with Mama's garden, and she knows all about flowers." James Whitmore's gaze moved from his son to Margaret, and she saw the exact moment when recognition dawned. His expression didn't fill with disgust as she had expected, but rather with confusion and concern. "Tommy," he said carefully, "why don't you go inside and wash up for supper?" "But Papa, I want you to meet—" "Inside, son, now!" Tommy cast a worried glance back at Margaret before reluctantly heading toward the house. "You'll still be here when I come back, won't you?" Margaret couldn't find her voice to answer. James was studying her with those penetrating blue eyes. I'll be going now," she managed to say, taking a step backward. "Wait." The words stopped her. James removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "You're Margaret O'Sullivan, aren't you? From the Silver Dollar?" Margaret's chin lifted slightly. "Yes, and before you say anything, I know what you're thinking. I know what I am, and I know I don't belong here. I'll leave right now." But James surprised her. Instead of condemnation, his expression softened with understanding. "What I'm thinking," he said quietly, "is that my son seems happier than I've seen him in months, and that someone took the time to water my wife's roses, which I've been neglecting shamefully." Margaret blinked, certain she had misheard. What?" James gestured toward the garden, where the evidence of their afternoon's work was clearly visible. The roses had been carefully watered, weeds had been pulled, and the vegetable patch had been tended with care. "Sarah planted this garden the year before she died," he continued. "She said it would be something beautiful for Tommy to remember her by. But I'm afraid I don't have her touch with growing things. Your wife had excellent taste," Margaret said softly. "The roses just needed water and attention. They're stronger than they look." James studied her for a long moment. "How long have you been here?" "Since last night. I needed somewhere to stay and your barn was empty. I'm sorry for trespassing. Have you eaten today?" The question caught her off guard. Tommy shared some cookies with me." James shook his head, a small smile playing at his mouth. That boy would share his last crumb with a stranger. "It's one of the things his mother taught him." He paused. "You look like you could use a proper meal." Margaret stared at him in disbelief. "Mr. Whitmore, I don't think you understand. I'm not a respectable woman. If people in town knew—" "People in town say a lot of things," James interrupted. "Most of it isn't worth the breath it takes to speak it." He looked toward the house, where Tommy's face was pressed against the kitchen window. "My son has been grieving his mother for almost a year," James continued. "Today is the first time I've seen him truly smile since we buried her. I don't know what you did, but you gave him something I haven't been able to give him, joy." Margaret felt tears prick at her eyes. "He's a remarkable child, I am. And Sarah would have been too." James replaced his hat. "The way I see it, anyone who can bring that kind of happiness to my boy deserves a hot meal and a safe place to sleep." "Mr. Whitmore." "James," he corrected. "And before you start listing reasons why this is a bad idea, let me ask you something. Where else do you have to go?" The question hung heavy between them. Margaret thought of Dodge City, of Mrs. Abernathy's hateful words, of the Silver Dollar Saloon. "Nowhere," she admitted quietly. James nodded. "Then it's settled. You'll stay for supper at least." "We can figure out the rest later." Tommy burst through the kitchen door, his face bright with hope. "Is Margaret staying for supper, Papa?" "Please say yes." James looked at his son's eager face, then at Margaret's uncertain one. "Yes, son. Margaret is staying for supper." The joy that lit up Tommy's features was like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. He grabbed Margaret's hand and began pulling her toward the house. As they walked toward the warm glow of the kitchen windows, Margaret felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the possibility of belonging. It was fragile and uncertain, but it was real. Behind them, James watched his son's animated gestures and heard his laughter echoing across the prairie. For the first time since Sarah's death, the house felt alive again. Perhaps, he thought, some angels came in unexpected forms. 6 months later. The spring morning was crisp and clear, with the kind of blue sky that seemed to stretch on forever. Margaret stood in the garden behind the Whitmore house, her hands dirty from planting new vegetable seedlings. The garden had flourished under her care, becoming even more beautiful than it had been in Sarah's time. Roses climbed the fence in profusion, vegetables grew in neat rows, and flowers bloomed in every corner. "Mama Margaret, come see what I found." Tommy came running across the yard, his face bright with excitement, clutching something in his cupped hands. At 8 years old now, he had grown taller, but his eyes still held the same innocent joy. "What is it, sweetheart?" Margaret asked, kneeling down to his level. Tommy opened his hands to reveal a small bird's nest. "It's empty, but look how perfect it is. Can we put it on the mantel with Mama Sarah's things?" Margaret's heart swelled with love for this remarkable child who had taught her that families could be built on love rather than blood. "Of course we can," she said, gently taking the nest. "Your Mama Sarah would have loved it." Tommy beamed and threw his arms around her neck. "I love you, Mama Margaret. I love you too, my darling boy." The sound of hoofbeats announced James's return, and Margaret felt the familiar flutter of happiness. Their relationship had grown slowly, carefully, built on mutual respect and shared love for Tommy. 3 months ago, James had asked her to marry him with simple honesty. "I love you, Margaret," he had said. "Not despite your past, but because of who you've become. You've brought life back to this house, joy back to my son, and hope back to my heart." Their wedding had been small, just the 3 of them, the preacher and Mrs. Henderson. The town had talked, but the people who mattered had welcomed her with open arms. "How are my 2 favorite people?" James asked as he dismounted, his face lighting up at the sight of his family. As they entered the house, their house, Margaret paused to look at the mantelpiece, where Sarah's photograph still held a place of honor, now surrounded by new memories, pictures of Tommy's birthday, their wedding portrait, drawings Tommy had made of their family. After lunch, as Tommy napped and James worked on accounts, Margaret found herself back in the garden. She knelt among the roses, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. A year ago, she had been a woman without hope. Now she was a wife, a mother, a valued member of a community. She had learned that the past didn't have to define the future, that love could conquer judgment. "Penny for your thoughts." James's voice startled her from her reverie. "Just thinking about how much has changed," she said, accepting his hand as he helped her to her feet. "Any regrets?" he asked. Margaret looked toward the house, where Tommy was probably dreaming of adventures, where their life together was written in every room. "None," she said firmly. "Not a single one." As the sun set over the Kansas prairie, the Whitmore family gathered on their porch. Tommy played with his toys, while James and Margaret sat together on the swing, watching their son and planning for tomorrow. In the distance, a train whistle echoed across the plains, carrying travelers to new destinations. But Margaret no longer felt the urge to run. She had found her destination, her home. She had learned that redemption wasn't something you earned through suffering, but something you accepted through love. And love could transform even the most unlikely souls into something beautiful. As Tommy's laughter rang out and James's hand found hers, Margaret smiled and knew that she was exactly where she belonged. Sometimes the greatest journeys led not to distant places, but to the home that had been waiting in your heart all along. If this story of redemption, family and second chances touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales from the American West. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that it's never too late for a new beginning. And let us know in the comments what stories you'd like to hear next. Until next time, remember that every ending is just a new beginning in disguise.